Welcome, everybody. Just as you're all coming in, we're just going to give people a few minutes before we get started. Hi, everybody. We're just at 50 people, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm Dr. Caitlin Pentifallo, and I'm really excited to be leading this webinar today, along with Teresa Yu. First, I'll tell you a little bit about Novata for those that might be new here. First, I lead our regulatory strategy and sustainability practice within our metrics and regulations team. Novata is a sustainability management platform and advisory that empowers businesses to achieve sustainability goals. What we're doing is making it easy for private markets to navigate an evolving sustainability landscape, collect, analyze, report on data and metrics that matter, and ultimately to connect sustainability strategy into meaningful outcomes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Teresa, and I, along with Caitlin, lead Novata's Metrics and Regulations team. Within Novata, we are a team of specialists that monitor global sustainability standards, frameworks, and regulations for quantifiable metrics to help businesses integrate sustainability from diligence to exit. We're really trying to focus on driving value creation with sustainability metrics. And so we're tapped into all the monitoring all the global frameworks to help you. My personal background is around climate policy and impact evaluation. And in today's session, we're going and unpacking the rapidly evolving regulatory landscape that's shaping climate disclosures in the US and beyond, with a particular focus for US investors. We're sharing insights into US regulatory updates, including the latest on the SEC's climate disclosure rule. We'll explore how state-level disclosures are taking shape, what's already in place and where, what's on the horizon, as well as how they compare across jurisdictions. We'll also take a look more on a macro level around global developments, such as the EU Omnibus and again, its implications for US-based companies. Whether you're an investor yourself or a company trying to make sense of the complex landscape, I hope you leave the session with a sense of clarity around trends and next steps for you and your organization. We'll absolutely leave time at the end to answer any questions that you may have, so feel free to drop them in the chat. Great. So first, let's go over what's happening with the SEC. So a very quick retrospective on the climate-related disclosures for investors. This rule would have required companies registered with the SEC, so all public companies, to disclose high-level material information concerning risk management practices at their companies, including climate-related financial risks, as well as Scope 1 and 2. Larger companies were also required to do 1 and 2 emissions if material. The SEC narrowly approved the rule in early 2024, and this was a huge deal. This was the first time we've ever had a federal level climate disclosure in the US. And it was already watered down from what was originally proposed because several trade groups and trade associations immediately launched legal campaigns against it. Pretty immediately after, the rule faced significant opposition, and the SEC ultimately administered an administrative stay quickly after, I think it was a month after. As a result of the stay, the climate rules have never gone into effect. It's kind of been in this no man's land all of 2024. And of course, we had a whole presidential election take place in the meantime as well. In February 2025, this year, the SEC announced that the agency would be pausing its defense to legal challenges against the disclosure rule, which means that it would stop defending it in courts. Under the backdrop of Trump's second administration, most notable for its anti-ESG approach, it was all but expected when the SEC officially voted to end its defense earlier this year in March. As it stands right now in May, it may still pass, but it's very unlikely given the legal challenges that it's facing. Here is a broad timeline of what happened with the SEC rule. It's pretty disheartening as a timeline, to be honest. As a US investor, you see momentum picking up on a federal scale just to have it be rolled back pretty significantly. However, on our metrics and regulations team, we like to look at the glass being half full. You kind of have to in climate policy nowadays. And we really like to focus on the state level disclosures and what's happening amidst this timeline as well. State regulations have quietly emerged to fill in the gaps of climate disclosure reporting requirements in the US, obviously with California leading the way. I'm sure we've all heard about the California climate disclosures. We'll also go into that a little bit later on today. But it passed in October 2023, which actually predates the SEC rule and was officially signed into law October. As you can see from the timeline on screen, even just this year, so even after Trump's presidency, we see a lot of state-level legislation propping up, most notably New York, New Jersey, Colorado, very similar legislation, which we'll also get into. And most recently was Illinois in March, just a couple months ago. Here is a very quick snapshot of the state level disclosures themselves. They're pretty part and parcel. They follow a similar through line and are clearly modeled after California's. Aside from California's, which is the only one in the implementation phase, the rest are under legislative review. And so I don't want to get too in the weeds because it's very likely that some things may change given as it goes through the legislative process. But a quick snapshot here is that they all pretty much have to do with if you are working or doing business within the state lines themselves, companies above $1 billion. Scope 1 and 2 are pretty clearly across all of them, with Scope 3 being phased in various years. Third-party verification, limited insurance is also being phased in as an approach, and enforcement will also vary. The next few slides are going into the specific language of the bills. They're all pretty much going to include some sort of carbon inventory disclosure. Some may be thinking about verification with verification along the way. Here's Colorado's, New Jersey's. I think everyone has not been clear about what it means to do business in the state except for New York's. New York's has a very clear delineation of what it means to do business. Our team is monitoring for any updates that they share regarding what it means to do business. Here is New York's, which was the most, at least linguistically, different, but pretty much going to be Scope 1, 2.
I think Teresa
Mhm.
can jump in here on these. I think
Mhm.
part of our reason in sharing what's on these slides and what each individual state is looking like is a little bit, one, a glimpse into what we do on a daily basis, which is reading these legislative texts, seeing each bill as it goes through each assembly, how it comes up, how it's portrayed in the media. And so what we're doing here is just showing the wide variation on what is a super consistent theme. We all know that they want to see scope 1 and 2. We know that states are also really considering scope 3, and they're all very firm on $1 billion. However, how each state writes that all out can be very different. So all those interpretations can be unique to the state's tax code, unique to those bodies that are passing it. In California, for example, we have CARB, the California Air Resource Board, which is responsible for receiving a lot of those. However, despite how, even if it might seem a little bit disjointed, what's really great about this and what Teresa's been highlighting is that there really is that kind of clear through line across all four of these states that we just showed. So ton of consistency, even in how they're asking for IFRS or TCFD aligned disclosures. So rather than making up their own thing that you're going to have to do, really going back to relying on and leaning on that IFRS or TCFD style template that lots are already familiar with is a really great sign of where this is going in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. And just wanting to highlight again, the stark similarities across the state disclosures really show that while the landscape feels fragmented, the reality is one towards alignment. And it's great that California is jumping in as a guinea pig. We'll have lots of lessons learned in the next year as they go through the process of implementation. And here is summarizing just the climate legislation from California that a lot of the other states are modeled after. Again, it's really going to take from TCFD, it's going to take from the carbon emissions, as well as any kind of audit-ready data collection behaviors will also be very valuable as you're getting ready for climate legislation in the US. These proposed policies really build a sense of inevitability to climate reporting in the US. Even though there is no overarching federal law, I think we're pretty confident where we stand that your business, depending on where your operations take place, it's unlikely that your business will not touch at least one of the state with climate disclosures in the pipeline. Right now, across California, New York, New Jersey, Colorado, Illinois, it accounts for 31% of US GDP. So we're pretty confident that either you or your supply chain will touch some sort of climate legislation. There are definitely details waiting to be smoothed over, entities and scope, specific dollar amounts, enforcement timelines, etc. California has already announced that the first year of reporting will be there would be a lot of leeway for people just starting to figure things out. And so I would not worry about enforcement too much, at least in the first year. Definitely details that are waiting to be smoothed over, but emphasizing again, common denominator across the state disclosures are going to be carbon inventory of at least scopes 1 and 2 to start. Scope 3 is ideal and recommended and will be phased in most likely, along with limited assurance. Some sort of climate-related financial risk disclosure, so get familiar with the TCFD framework. And in lieu of an overarching federal rule, we can definitely pay attention to the states, as well as loosely what's happening globally. And so we'll passing it over to Caitlin to share a little bit about what the global outlook looks like for US companies.
Exciting. Okay, so if you've got anything to do in Europe, you've probably heard these words, and you probably are on this webinar because you've heard of that and also some sustainability work, but omnibus. So overall, what does omnibus mean? What does it look like? How is that taking shape? We're seeing this play out across a really extensive legislative process, all happening within the European Parliament, across the European Commission, and many of Europe's political parties. So this was, by and large, a big surprise for many that are in the industry after spending so much time getting ready and prepping for CSRD. However, all is not lost, but there are some really important distinctions and changes that were made through Omnibus that you should be aware of. So CSRD, being the first one and kind of the one probably most in the crosshairs, is a really significant reduction in scope. So the reporting threshold previously was a lot slower, and it was going to see companies over time being phased in, going from those larger companies, and then smaller companies were going to come in and take effect. However, now that bar has been raised to over 1,000. So that took that total number of companies in scope for CSRD and reduced it by about 80%. So lots of those small companies now no longer having a regulatory need to report on CSRD using those ESRS data points. The next big one, to much fanfare, was the Stop the Clock initiatives. So stop the clock was kind of a phrase that they were using to say, we want to just hit the pause button right here. And that happened for a couple ways. So one is that reporting requirements were going to be slowed down by 2 years for companies scheduled to report in 26 and 27. By pausing the clock, they're going to do something really significant, which is at the same time reduce the number of data points. So right now, Novata still carries, and we still have, as we'll wait for those amendments, more than 1,100 ESRS specific data points. And so big word came out that they wanted to cut this by 75%. So for those that are, in this space and have seen CSRD, yes, we know that was very large. A lot was going on, but companies, especially in that first wave, were really making strides to get that done. And we were starting to see reports come out in line with ESRS reporting. However, all of those are now going to be significantly distilled by about 75%, with a real emphasis on those quantitative numbers, other decimals, percentages, those cold hard quantitative facts that they're really kind of focusing in on, which, philosophically is super interesting because CSRD, like many other of the disclosures we're seeing, are in fact disclosure based. They want to hear in qualitative terms what your risk situation is like, what you did for a scenario analysis. They want you to disclose what those internal governance practices and mechanisms are. And so really focusing on those quantitative numbers and doing such a significant cut definitely changes the shape of what CSRD looks like over time. When we step back and think about what was CSRD's ultimate goal, it was to give us this one big data set that we were going to have so much information. I think as time went on and this debate went on, people realized, wait a second, it's actually pretty hard to compare and combine all of these kinds of disclosures. So in some ways, I think there is welcome news that people really are thinking about this in the context of the European Commission and the European Parliament. of how this process can be made better. And in the end, what we all want, what investors want, what companies want, is decision-ready data. So really keeping that at focus is something that I think makes us, a little less despair on a day-to-day basis, but still really important to keep kind of in context. From the perspective of CSDDD, or the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, this was going to be by and large the largest supply chain regulation that was going to come into effect. However, we're seeing two big things here. So one, a scope limitation. So immediately this narrows due diligence obligations to direct tier one suppliers only. So previously, when we think about kind of the triumvirate of these regulations and how they work together, CSDDD was going to pull in lots of supply chain data, lots of supplier information from across multiple tiers, going out quite a ways. So are we losing some of that information? Yes, but they're hoping to do it in a way that keeps it super compact and really limits the burden on those supply chain companies that might be needing to provide tons of information over and over again in the context of the global supply chain. Like CSRD, stop the clock also applying here. This is all within the same kind of baskets of legislation, but here we have an application delay, postponing implementation by a year, and then large companies are going to start compliance in July of 28. Lastly, on EU taxonomy, this has always been a super fun one, but we're expecting to see a ton of change in terms of reporting simplification. So this is going to help line these across CSDDD, across EU taxonomy to make sure that these are kind of squared away. And now it'll only apply to companies with more than 1,000 employees. So hitting that mark that CSRD kind of stepped out in terms of that number of employees in terms of scope. And lastly, we're also expecting to see quite a significant change in terms of the mechanism of action, as I would call it, which is the do no significant harm principle. So there's lots of ways that social standards are incorporated into EU taxonomy. I would say it's one of the hardest to kind of get indicators and metrics and systems built around because of how nebulous they are. However, DNSH is still going to be remaining in place, but we might see some direction coming out, kind of structuring the direction of that. And I would think it's going to change a little bit along with those minimum social safeguards that were also included. On the next one, what do we have? Oh, wait a second, this sounds really hard. Things are changing all the time. What's the best way to come up with that? And I really set myself up for this one because I'm going to be talking a little bit about one of our newer tools, which is Novata's Regulatory Navigator. So this is something that's been designed to help clients navigate this complex landscape with a bit more confidence and a bit more clarity than we typically are seeing. So what we've done is created a database of regulations that span things as large as CSRD and CSDDD and go all the way down to, state levels or what you might see in plastics or packaging. Tons of stuff that we've kept an eye on globally and we've concentrated in the same place. What our tool also allows us to do is as you enter that company information, it'll tell you really quickly, hey, you're in scope for this, you're out of scope for this one, because here you are sitting at, 900 employees instead of over that 1,000. We're using those mechanisms within the database and within the app itself to help you understand which ones you're potentially in scope for. So because we have, oh yeah, I'll show this one first and then I'll jump into a quick preview of the tool. This is what it looks like when something pops up that is relevant to you. It's going to tell you kind of an overview, what the requirements are of something like this. We already talked about 253 key dates, so really getting some great information at a glance. And then it's going to show you whether or not you meet some of that qualifying criteria. So this would then, kind of go on to something that you can watch. You can filter by region, you can filter by country, anything like that. You can export these lists and incorporate that into your own workflows. So I'm just going to ask to replace this share. Hopefully, Teresa, this is working on your end.
Mhm.
Perfect. So a little bit about what the tool likes. It's totally free for anybody to use. You don't have to be a current Novata user to go into it. But as you're getting set up here, I've got a fake company. You're just gonna be asked for a little bit of information, employees, revenue, assets under management, the sector that you're in, geographically, where are you? Do you qualify as doing business in California? And then some other entities abroad as well. And then once this information comes in, it's going to come back and show you exactly which regulations you can expect to be in scope for. So say, for example, on this one's out of India, as you can see from the APAC and the India tags up here. But this is the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report. It's going to give you an overview, key dates, requirements, and then conditions for applicability. So why is this showing up as in scope for you? And in this case, it's listed on India's stock exchange and is considered a top 1,000 company within that stock exchange. So all of that is explained here, but then those kind of quick criteria checks will show you what that looks like. So a great way to kind of put in information and see what comes back, and then decide what kind of steps you need to take in order to move forward. Should you want to take this information out of the platform and, go into a bit of detail with your teams, you're also welcome to pull that off and do that as well. So this is a tool that we're constantly in development on. We love to see users getting in there and asking us questions, asking for different regulations to be added. So please feel free to sign up, send requests, questions, and we'll do our best to incorporate that into our database. But consider that one possible tool as you think about the mounting complexity across the regulatory landscape and ways that Novata can also support you.
Our Regulatory Navigator is also free to sign up. Great. We're going to hit a poll in case anybody's interested in a demo around Regulatory Navigator or Novata, our platform at all. Please just answer the poll and somebody will be in touch. Great. Thank you. Looks like we have a couple questions, but we'll get to at the end. Going to take back the screen share. Great. So I think what we'll end with these 3 high-level tools and tips for navigating regulatory complexity. Kaylin, you want to take the first one? Oh, you're on.
Thanks, Teresa. The first one, things that we recommend for this, one would be focusing on materiality and really getting familiar with that carbon inventory and what that's going to look like. So when we say carbon inventory, what does that mean and how could it kind of come together? There's lots of ways. There's really kind of no one single way established to do this, but these are all really significant and included as, scope 1 and scope 2 as part of that. So a broader carbon inventory can look at, did you go through 3.1 goods and services? If you were including scope 3, what were your methodologies used? And what are some of those finer data points? All of that can be super helpful in the context of an upcoming, assurance review or an audit or anything like that. For our second point here, I would just add that keeping an eye on kind of those bigger and those ones that we really do expect to stay, IFRS and VSME are really good examples of that. So IFRS is something that around the world is being picked up. It's really significant uptake in APAC with Australia, Hong Kong, Japan, Singapore, lots of places adopting this as part of their sustainability reporting disclosures. And then VSME kind of being the next kind of child of what comes out of CSRD, which is it's around 50 metrics. There's a basic and a comprehensive. It's considered a voluntary standard for small to medium enterprises. And it's a great way to kind of really dive into those quantitative pieces. So I would say keeping up with what's happening on the IFRS and VSME front is always a great idea.
To add on that, IFRS is going to be a global significant framework and regulation. We've seen several countries, I think as of September, it was like 30 countries around the world have already taken steps to legally implement IFRS S1 and S2. Sometimes they're going to adopt it to fit their country-specific context. And so we've seen that already with Brazil, Canada, Japan, and the UK, and that they've already made the decision to adopt or otherwise use the standards at a high level. We are tracking all of that beyond in the context of California, and we will have different tools based on the country that you're reporting from and which ones you're complying to. The last one is kind of a more last important tool and tip we want to leave off is to just build a strong sustainability foundation at your company where compliance is a byproduct. And what that means is establishing data governance processes that will support disclosure regardless of what's happening on a regulatory front. And I like to say, like, to prioritize no regret actions, actions that are gonna make sense for you, no matter the regulatory uncertainty. So things like improving operational efficiency, knowing where your carbon hotspots are, refining your messaging around sustainability and long-term value creation. I would use the time right now where globally all the kinks are getting figured out to really take the time to refine internally what sustainability means for you and your organization, and then aligning them to long-term goals. Use the pause right now to strengthen internally why this matters, why sustainability metrics matter. I would use it as prep time and not downtime. Great. Great. We can take a couple of questions since we have some time. We have one question around limited assurance. Is Novata familiar with the expectations for limited assurance? In other words, what would limited assurance require?
Want me to take that one, Teresa?
Yeah, I can add on too.
Good. So, limited assurance is a great question. But one, it's going to be independent. It's got to be a third party. So, no, it's never happening at Novata, although we do know partners that we can recommend to you. And the goal and overall objective in a limited assurance context is to provide a moderate level of confidence that the information has not been materially misstated. So, is this by and large accurate? So this might go through, a sample of data points. It might go through and say, were internal processes aligned here? Is what's being included and reported something that is going to meet that criteria of being moderately confident? So I would say that is kind of what people are by and large going for, although each auditor probably a little bit different. This would also contrast with reasonable assurance, which has got to be a high level. You are probably doing something much closer to a financial audit. And so that's a little bit more rigorous there.
Yeah, I like to think of limited assurance as like ensuring that there are no red flags. Like they're kind of just like going through with a high level, no red flags, great. Reasonable assurance though, you'll be testing your methodologies, like which spend-based calculators did you use, which did you use activity-based? So really digging into like the methodologies and the calculations. Very similar, as Caitlin said, to a financial audit. We have one question, Caitlin, I think, around if our data is already in Nevada, how do we access RegNav?
Ooh, awesome. So RegNav does have a slightly different login for that. Be happy to help you get that set up. And also, some of the questions are a little bit different than you might be familiar with on what we call our company info page. So you might have seen, I know I was going super fast, but we're asking about doing business in California. And so that's a definition that's a little bit different from we might just ask, what other countries are you operating in? So there's a little bit of minutia on some of these questions that help our database generate things that are super accurate. So we'd be happy to help you get up and running and bring over some of that data so that you can have kind of a smooth experience with it.
Yeah, reach out. I have a question around tracking IFRS more broadly. I think I kind of answered that in our closing. We are tracking that more broadly, definitely on RegNav and absolutely on platform as well. We have one question around the ESRS data points due for October. Caitlin, you want to take that?
So I would say keep an eye on this date because we've seen EFRAG kind of change a few times. One, the group had released a work plan about a month ago, and then the broader group had said, no, that's not sufficient, like go back and do it again. There's quite a good degree of eyes and scrutiny on these ESRS revisions. All to say, I'm not even sure if it's going to come out in late October, but that is right now the plan. We certainly would need that in order for that, stop the clock initiative to be worthwhile. And in terms of a draft being out right now, no. There isn't kind of that consolidated place where you can say, up, let me just look through IG3 and see how that's different now. We don't have anything like that, but what we have read or gathered, from between the lines is that with such a heavy focus on quantitative, that's where I definitely invest time in things like, what's your unadjusted gender pay gap? What are those scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions? Like, what is your level of, water being released, in certain areas of biodiversity? These are all things that anything hard, fast, quantitative that's not phrased as the qualitative disclosure is likely to make it in, although we don't have a definite answer on that.
Yeah. I think given the amount of CSRD reports that have already come out from companies, I think I would prioritize areas in the ESRS that we absolutely are pretty confident in. So E1, climate, workforce, S1, G1, those are absolutely most likely going to be in the new revised reduced data points.
I see a question here, Teresa. Is the vision to embed this fully into the framework development process so that GPs can use it in their annual data collection process versus a separate solution? We would love to see it fully embedded. So right now, because so many things are changing, this was something that we were able to pull together super fast. We only started development work in Q1 on it because we wanted to get a tool into the hands of people that were having to go through all these changes with Omnibus. Feedback from that process, though, has been super positive that we would definitely like to incorporate this as GPC. Hey, you know what? I know that I'm going to have to be reporting under SECR. This has come up for me on the regulatory nav. I want to make sure I have all those metrics in. So SECR would actually be slightly different, but definitely aligned to IFRS. So we would love for the platform to kind of speak back and forth in that way. Having that finalized list of ESRS data points and letting the dust settle on Omnibus as things are still technically up in the air would definitely help us drive towards that full integration in the platform.
Yeah, I love the Regulatory Navigator and I use it often. Great. Those are all the questions that we have, and I think we can end it here. As always, Caitlin and I are always ready to chat about this stuff. We love talking about this stuff. We love talking about climate regulation and what's happening globally, regionally, locally. And so please do not hesitate to reach out. And again, of course, if you want a demo of Novata, also feel free to reach out as well. That's it, folks.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.